when Paul stopped him. Don't do that. We're all still here. Nobody's run away. The jailer got a torch and ran inside. And badly shaken, he collapsed in front of Paul and Silas. He led them out of the jail and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved, to really live?" They said, "Put your entire trust in the Master Jesus, then you'll live as you were meant to live, and everybody in your home included." They went out on to spell out in detail the story of the Master. The entire family got in on this part. They never did get to bed that night. The jailer made them feel at home, dressed their wounds, and then he couldn't wait till morning and was baptized, he and everyone in his family. There in his home, he had food set out for a festive meal. It was a night to remember. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, along with this story, about any story that you get in the book of Acts is going to be about as good a story as it gets. Luke, as many of us know, wrote not only the book of Luke, but the book of Acts, this companion piece. And as the church began and all the disciples and the apostles began their work, they ran into all manner of things that made for good stories in the formation of the church. In this story, we have a traveling cyclic with personal agents. We have a lucrative fortune-telling business, 2 itinerant missionaries who are stripped naked by the local police. We have a public meeting in the middle of the town square. We're introduced to a first-century jailhouse and midnight crazy rantings of prisoners in maximum security sights and leg irons. We have an earthquake that some supposed came about by the rousing singing of hymns and praying. Doors flung open wide and a jailer who draws the sword from his sheath ready to do himself in. But that's not all. Before the night is over, we have prisoners that stayed in place, and we have Paul and Silas whose wounds are dressed by the jailkeeper who would keep them in lock and chain. And we have an entire family who wants to know the way of salvation. And before morning is up, they've professed their faith and they're baptized. And then they sat down at table and broke bread together. No wonder this was a night for everyone to remember. There's a lot of different directions that you could take the story. I've studied it from different angles and read different commentaries on it, but I think for today's purposes, I want to focus our attention on that inner jail cell. And I want us to take a closer look at Paul and Silas as they sat there, 2 missionaries that had no better sense, beaten black and blue and bloodied, to be singing robust hymns and praying in the midst of their demise. It seems to me that what these guys need is a good trial lawyer, an F. Lee Bailey, and they need to not be worshiping. They need to face up to what's happened. Yet we find them doing the strange and peculiar thing. That prayer was not far from Paul and Silas's lips when they found themselves in this situation, though, is really not so strange, or at least it shouldn't be to us. Did you hear how the story began? They were leaving Philippi and they were doing what? Going where? Do you remember? As they were heading to the place of prayer. They were leaving Philippi on the way to the place of prayer when they ran into this psychic, fortune-telling, unnamed young woman. They had this chance encounter with her. So the stage is already set for a time of praise and prayer and worship. We just missed it because it happened when they were actually en route to do something else. The work of ministry and mission and missionaries is the kind that would land somebody on the possibility of running into a local with a special need or a situation that would need some of Christ's healing. And so it wasn't unusual that Paul and Silas would offer sympathy and have a sidewalk exorcism for someone right on site who needed their assistance. But the healing did occur when they were on their way to a place of prayer. It was not part of their daily itinerary. It was not something they had planned to do. And you know that's the way ministry works. Often When we are in the midst of doing something else, it's the interruptions that are cause for ministry. It's the things that we haven't planned for that interrupt our lives, that give us the opportunity to minister and to be ministered to, and usually to grow. The unexpected. So these men cast out a demon from an unsuspecting young woman, and certainly unsuspecting agents that owned her. And when they cast that demon out, she was released from the oppressive, sexist power of her oppressors. Maybe it wasn't so much compassion that led them to cast it out. We're told that she was a bit of an annoyance to them. She was, after all, following them around like a sibling brother or sister followed an older brother or sister. Maybe you were the older. She followed them around and she yelled to the top of their lungs, "These men are working for the Most High God." Now, can you imagine that being yelled when you are in Caesar's country, where Caesar alone is God and the emperor is king? It's a dangerous proposition, so it's no wonder that in the midst of compassion, they probably were annoyed and frightened and cast the demon out. It's also possible that Paul and Silas reacted, or maybe even overreacted, whether out of compassion or annoyance. Because if they had thought about it a little farther, they would have realized that by casting out the demon, those who owned her would surely be after their hides. These greedy moneymakers who were certain to face bankruptcy. We can only wonder what happened to the girl as well. She was, after all, gainfully employed, and she was a profitable fortune teller. What would happen to her now? She had no way to make money. Surely they wouldn't want her anymore. Would she be homeless? Would she be left to find the nearest shelter until her luck took a better turn? Freedom comes with a high price. When Jesus began his public ministry in Luke's gospel, in chapter 4 specifically, we're given a big clue to his mission and his passion prerogative. Jesus said as he was in the temple reading from the scroll of Isaiah, "He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, and to let the oppressed go free." In that same spirit in which Jesus lived and died, Paul, speaking to the church at Corinth, said this some 30 or 40 years later. "Now the Lord is a spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is" what? Freedom. There is freedom. If we have understood Christ's life and death in the right way, we know that if he was about anything in his life, it was about freeing people from bondage and sin in all the ways that it can present itself to us, whatever way or shape or form. And since there were lots of folks back then in bondage, and there are lots of us walking around today who are absolutely bound up by all manner of things, Jesus